Hello. In the Crown of Aragon 639 years ago, it was January 24th, 1387. My name is Jonathan Seyfried. I'm a PhD candidate in history at the University of New Mexico, and this is the Historian's Notebook, a podcast about how history gets made. Season 1 is titled Multcora Companiona. We're looking at a document from each day of the first year of the reign of King Johan I of Aragon and Queen Violant de Bar. So much of the documentation from the 14th century Crown of Aragon has been digitized by the Spanish government and is available on the website Pares, along with millions of documents from all kinds of archives across Iberia. All right, let's get started with today's document. Today's document is a short, just 6-line letter from Violant de Bar to the Pope. And when I say Pope, I mean Clement VII, the anti-Pope. So the term anti-Pope is very dramatic. And of course, the anti-Pope, according to Clement VII, would have been Urban VI. We're talking about a time when there were two popes, one in Rome and another in Avignon. This is the Great Schism of the 14th century, also known as the Great Western Schism. In the 14th century, the cardinals got into major conflict, not because of some kind of doctrinal disagreement, but simply because they disagreed about who should be the next pope. And so out of that disagreement came these two different institutions, one based in Rome and the other continuing on in Avignon, where the papacy had been located for several decades. And eventually this did get resolved at the very beginning of the 15th century. But in the time that Johan and Violant ruled, there was tremendous pressure for secular elites to pick a side. And Père the Ceremonious had refused to do so, and was probably just holding out for some kind of resolution to happen and for the schism to end. But he did not live to see that happen, and also Johan would not live to see that happen. The schism continued on into the beginning of the 15th century. When Johan was preparing to ascend to the throne of the Crown of Aragon, he decided that he was going to support Clement VII, the Avignon Pope. And this really tracked with Johan's Francophilia, his desire to adopt all kinds of culture and customs from France. Now, Violant, she was French, very French. She was the granddaughter of a French king and queen. Her uncle was the current French king. And so, like most elites in France, she chose to align with the Avignon Pope. And so, what's interesting is that I've been noticing that when Johan and Violant wanted something from the Pope, I'm seeing that it's Violant who's writing to the Pope more often than Johan. I have seen some letters from Johan to the Pope, but it's Violant. And the Pope doesn't have any major familial connections to the French royal family, the Valois, but there's a lot of other kinds of mutually beneficial relationship going on between the ruling elites in France and the Avignon papacy, even before this current pope. And so the allegiance that exists between the French elites and the Avignon Pope is one that Violant, I think, feels very at home in, and Johan understands this. And so that's why Violant is the one who's doing a lot of the writing to the Pope about maybe some low-level matters. I have a feeling that this particular letter is rather low level, and I wonder if the Pope actually read this. I've got a theory that I mentioned in an earlier instance when we were looking at a letter to the Pope, I think from Violant too, which is that the Pope didn't really get involved in some of this lower level stuff, and everyone understood that it would be handled by the papal bureaucracy. That's my theory with this one too. In this instance, Violant is writing to gain a promotion or a ecclesiastical post for someone in the letter who's identified as Johan Fernando Aranda. And then after his name, this is in line 3, it says Bachelor de Legibus. That would be a bachelor of law. He has a law degree. He went to some university and is seen as trained. It got a degree. It's not a doctorate. It's not a doctor of law. We would see that title used, a master of law or a doctor of law. But here it's, I guess, the lower level, which we also associate with the undergraduate degree. In our time, the bachelor's degree. And Violant is advocating for this particular individual to get a seat in the Barcelona ecclesiastical structure. I can't quite tell where in the official hierarchy this position, this open position, is in the Barcelona See, but it's some kind of opening. So she's advocating for this person, and I had never heard of Johan Fernando Aranda before, and so I did a Google search, got all kinds of random stuff, not from this time period. I added in the date, didn't really do any better, and this was an instance that I can say the AI chatbot was really helpful, because I prompted the chat to retrieve by priority scholarly results, and the chatbot came through and found an article from a very well-respected and prolific scholar of this time period, whose name is Maria Teresa Ferrer y Malol. And she had written an article about this person's brother. So the brother's name is Francisco de Aranda, and within this article about his efforts to get all kinds of glory and riches and promotions in the Crown of Aragon, Maria Teresa Ferrer Malal is describing how the monarchs would try to promote people in the ecclesiastical hierarchy through a lot of correspondence to the popes, and really focuses a lot on the reign of Martí in making this argument. But in the course of highlighting the journey of Francisco de Aranda, Ferrer y Malol also talks about his brother, who is the subject of this letter from Violant. And it turns out that later on, Johan and Violant tried to get Johan Fernandez to get promoted even higher in the ecclesiastical hierarchy in Tarragon. And it didn't work initially. They just kept advocating for him. Not quite sure why it was such an uphill battle, but it was. And so that there's documentation of them writing again and again to advocate for Johan Fernando Aranda. So we see this again and again where the people who are in charge of the state, the royal family, they're trying to also influence who gets jobs in the church. And I think that this is all part and parcel of the way that, well, elites will, everybody does. It's networking, okay? So you're trying to promote the people that you know, and then they will then be grateful to you, and it's all cooperative. It can get into corruption and graft and selling of offices and so forth. But, it can also have a very innocent, just, I know this person's a good person. I think they should get the job. Their family has done good work for me. They continue to do good work. They've benefited me. It'll benefit everybody and myself if they get this job. So there's a lot of ways to read this. It can be read as interference. It can be read as recommending somebody who's high quality for all the virtuous, selfless reasons you might do so. But it all is about the ties that all of these folks are building with each other, because authority, legitimacy, power, status, they are all network-based phenomena. And the more that you extend your ties and the more that your recommendations are accepted and the more that your people, your trusted confidants, the people who've been there for you are rising up in the ranks, the more power and prestige you are going to have. So it's a constant activity that all of the elites are engaged in, recommending people, promoting people, trying to advocate for people. And this was just a way that people of the past, as well as people in our time, build up their own power base and also build up communities that function according to the priorities that they have. So the more that you have people who see things the way you do in positions of power, the more you are going to see the goals and the values that you hold dear further promoted and achieved. So this is something that we can observe in these documents and say, oh, it was some kind of, weird blending of church and state that was like interference or something we can see as a problem. But I think, you have to remember that the church was it was definitely religious, but it was also very much like the largest corporation in town, that the people who were in these offices, they had a huge amount of authority, as the people who were government officials also had a huge amount of authority, and so they wanted to cooperate with each other, and there was a lot of overlap. So that's why we see this level of involvement from the royal family in advocating for people in these ecclesiastical positions. But there's another twist to this. In Ferrer Malliot's article, she talks about how the brother of Johan Fernando Aranda, the person in this letter, his brother had been a long-time ally of Martí and had been engaged in a lot of activities like battles and struggles and whatever that Martí had been doing. And In the more recent past, as in the previous few weeks, the brother of this person in the article, the brother's name is Francisco de Aranda, had been with Marti as they were pursuing Sibylla. And so Violant, maybe as she's advocating for Johan Fernando de Aranda in this letter, maybe she is also trying to boost up a family member of someone that she has heard was assisting in the apprehension of Sibylla, her rival. So we have here the interaction between Violant and Marti coming to fore, potentially, if that really is an accurate reading of the subtext of this letter. So I think this letter can be seen as another example of what I'm calling Team Next Gen, where Violant, Marti, and Johan, and to an extent, Marti's wife, Maria de Luna, they are operating as a team and trying to set up something new after the end of the long reign of Per the Ceremonious. I want to make a note of something that I've been doing in this episode, and you might have noticed in other episodes, which has to do with an alternation between the way of saying somebody's name in Latin and in Catalan and in Castilian, which is known colloquially as Spanish. The Spanish that's spoken most populously, like for example in Latin America, is the Castilian language that then became known as Spanish. But there's actually quite a number of languages spoken in Spain, including the Basque language in the north, the Catalan language in the region Valencia, Catalonia, and Aragonese. So there's a lot of languages in Iberia, even and persisting to this day. And something that's actually quite common is to see the same names in these multiple languages, which happened today. So in the article by Maria Teresa Ferrer Mayol, she's writing in Castilian, although she's absolutely fluent and does a lot of writing in Catalan. And then the document itself is written in Latin, but then the person was someone who most likely was in their life most commonly referred to in Catalan. So we've got, three different ways of talking about someone named in English John. So we have the Catalan Joan, we have the Latin Johan, and we have the Castilian Juan. And so I've just been going all back and forth in today's episode, and hopefully that wasn't too confusing. All right, thanks for listening to this episode of The Historian's Notebook, Season 1, Molt Cara Compagnona. If you are leaving with more questions than you arrived with, I have done my job. Remember, the motto of The Historian's Notebook is dissatisfaction guaranteed. Visit the website to see an image of today's document and additional show notes. The article that I've been referring to by Maria Teresa Ferrer Mayol is actually available for free, so I'll put a link onto the webpage for today's episode so you can look at that. And listen again tomorrow to hear about the next day in the first year of the reign of King Johan I of Aragon and Queen Violant de Bar. In the meantime, take care.